And we are now recording the session, so I am going to turn it over to Jim Stubanas to do his presentation. Jim?
Philip, can you see my desktop okay? I have Green Apple Enterprises up on the screen.
I can see it. Yep.
Great. Okay, well, I would like to thank everyone for attending. I always like to see these releases. I think Intacct is an amazing product in that they offer an update to their product every single quarter. I've worked with a number of accounting packages through the years, and none of them compares to Intacct in terms of the level of upgrade and refinement of the product on a quarterly basis. So what I'd like to do today is go over the new features that were released this past weekend. Some of them I'm going to go into in some depth. Others I will just talk about, since they are rather elaborate. So by starting this presentation, I'd like to make everyone aware of how they can go through and see the updates that were available. If you navigate up to the top left-hand corner of the screen where there's the home, you will see a listing here for Intacct product updates, and specifically the one that was just released is called 2016 Release 3. So I have a number of tabs open today for this product. I'm going to work off of this tab, and I'm going to go down through each of these and talk about those, about each of the features, and give a little bit of a demonstration for some of them. Others, I will just simply tell you what the changes are. So starting with the newest feature that Intacct has, they have a new module. It's called Spend Control, not Spend Control. And what they have done is they have allowed you to now set in to the budgetary process the warnings against specific GL accounts. So if we go into, and the way that you turn this on is you would go into Company and down into Subscriptions, and you will see this now. There's a button called Spend Control. If you haven't installed it, it will be down here under Available Applications. And the nice thing about this is it's free of charge for the Intacct users. When you click on that, you'll get a Configure button, and then this will go in and it will ask you what budget it's going to read the controls from. Starting budget periods, I put in January 2016, and then we can have it validate on a quarterly, monthly, current year basis. And what I want to do is when I exceed my budget, I want it to warn me. It also enforces dimensional control so that if I wanted to monitor and warn me of my budgets on each of my dimensions, right now I have it set the location, but I could have it monitor it all the way down to a department or project level if I wanted to. The next thing that you do is you identify what are the purchasing documents that you wanted to evaluate your spending against. So, of course, prerequisite is that you're using the purchasing module. Further down, you set up the GL accounts that you're going to monitor and the item GL groups. So what I've done is I've gone in here, I have set one up for insurance so that we could see this in action. And so then I say save, and my spend control is ready to use. The next thing that you need to do in order to use spend control is you would want to go in and you would want to set up budgets for those GL accounts that you'd want to monitor. So what I did was I went in here, I created a budget for 2016. You can see I made that my default budget. And then here, if I drill down into my budget details, you can see that I've added some GL accounts here. I've added one for insurance. Now, the way that the product works is that when you go in, for instance, I coded it to give me a warning on purchase orders, is if I go in and create a purchase order, and here I'm just going to add a purchase order, put in my vendor, and as soon as I look up an item here for insurance and put in my amount, I'm going to put in my location and my department. I've coded this to have a warning if my insurance exceeded $1,000 for a given period. So as soon as I do that and I try to post my transaction, I'll get a warning that will come up on the screen right here at the very top. And it simply warns me that I've exceeded my amounts for my budget. I told the system to warn me. I could also tell it to prevent me from using these monies because they exceed the budget. If I want to override that, I can simply hit post and allow me to proceed through processing the purchase order. So that's a good example of how spend control works. I think it's great for people, for instance, that have to monitor their budgets and are actively using the Intacct budgets, which is a great financial tool. And again, it is free. So feel free to take advantage of the product going forward. Okay, so the next thing that I'd like to talk about, just to mention, because I don't believe we have many Canadian customers, is that Intacct now supports Canadian banking, and they have the ability to print a Canadian-style check. So for any of you who are doing any business in Canada using Canadian bank accounts, they now support that check. The next capability that they have is referred to as the transaction summaries for AP and AR. Now, what this is about is typically in the past when you use Intacct under your configuration, I'm going to use accounts payable as an example, you had the ability to go in and set the detail that the posting was pushed up to the general ledger, for instance, was on a daily, monthly, or user-defined, typically a batch type process for doing your posting. Now they have the ability to do it literally on a transaction by transaction basis, so that if you want to see a great deal of detail in your accounts payable postings, your general ledger, or your accounts receivable, instead of that transaction amount being rolled up for all transactions for the day and summarized in the general ledger, you will now be able to see each individual posting from the transaction represented in the general ledger. So let's take a look and see what that's like. I went in ahead of time. I put a couple invoices into accounts payable when it was set on daily, and then what I did was I changed this setting to show the individual transactions. So if I go to general ledger, and I'm going to run the general ledger report, I'm just going to set my reporting period down to today, since I put them in today, and I'm going to click View. So what you'll see here is that initially there are some batches that came in here for groups of invoices. And then I turned it on, and now you can see the detail is different, so that I can have it represent individual invoices for my transactions rather than a batch summary. So if I drill down to, for instance, this invoice, this will show me an individual invoice behind this transaction rather than a batch. So for those of you who would like to have a much greater level of detail in your general ledger posting, from the accounts payable and the accounts receivable, all you need to do is go into your control, your setup for accounts receivable and accounts payable, scroll down to your settings down here for summary frequency, and you can change these now to 1 per invoice, 1 per bill if you'd like. Nice feature. We've had some people ask about that. And incidentally, when you look at the enhancements that are taking place through these quarterly updates, you'll also notice on some occasions they give the examples of where it is the feedback from the customers as to how many people actually voted for these enhancements. So I encourage you as the users to log into Intacct's customer portal, feed them your suggestions because they do count. And every time you vote on a suggestion that already exists in the system, the user count will go up 1. And if you create a new one, then other people, when they go in the log suggestion, will see that as an available suggestion. So please keep that in mind and continue to give them your ideas. Okay, the next thing that I'd like to talk about is the ability for those people who are using project costing to go in and assign transaction rules now on a user-by-user basis. So for some people, this may be new, but here in the project costing module, we have the ability to go in and create what's referred to as a transaction rule. And what these rules do is they read the type of transaction. The 2 examples I have here are a transaction that will calculate contractor overhead at a different rate than employee overhead. So for instance, every time that a time entry is entered into a project, it'll read that transaction, it'll read the contractor's hourly or salary rate, and then over here what it will do is it will take that cost amount and it will multiply it by 10%, and it'll apply it over to these general ledger accounts. Now what's nice about this is once I establish this transaction rule, and you can have as many of these as you want, you can go in and you can apply these to any projects that you're using. This particular transaction rule multiplies by 10% because they're a contractor. It could be that my overhead rates that I want to apply burden to for an employee could be higher. And I could go in here and I can set a different rule up for an employee. And what's nice is I also have a duplicate button here that I can copy over that transaction rule and modify it slightly and then save it over. You don't have to build them up from scratch. You can simply duplicate those over. When you want to use a transaction rule, you then would go into your project. I have one set up here. We're building the Raleigh Hospital. And then under the additional information, over here on the right-hand side, you'll see transaction rule. So for instance, the one that I set up here, I could add the contractor overhead, and I could add the employee overhead. And what this will do for the project system is anytime labor charges are posted against this project through the time entry system, it'll read the labor charge for each of those types of employees, read the multiplier, and post the overhead charges directly to the project. So that's a great feature that they've added. So I'm going to go ahead and save that. They've added some additional features in here in that they now offer the ability for projects to include actual billing in the invoices that you print out of the project module. I'm going to just mention that rather than bring up the template. Another feature is they have now added the ability for tasks to be dependent on another task. So for instance, if I go in here and I look at the Raleigh Hospital, and we might in fact use a task multiple times. So I can say, for instance, that this SOW or the project manager assignment is contingent on the SOW being completed as well, so that I can at any given time see the dependencies of each of my tasks from the tasks behind them. If I use a task more than once, Intacct has now added the capability to include it in multiple instances in the same project, so that if someone's coming on doing some type of work and then other tasks need to be completed and then we reassign them back into that same task, we can add the task in multiple times into a project. So that's another neat feature. And if we look at the Gantt chart for this particular project, what you will see is a graphical representation of the task here, SOW, and it's attached or linked to the project manager assignment. So that indicates that the project manager assignment is contingent on the completion of the SOW. So for those using projects, great feature. For anyone who is using an import of expenses from external systems, share these ideas with you. They have now more closely integrated the integration of expense types into Intacct's employee expense module, and they have the ability to automatically select it for payment, where previously you had to manually go in and check off the reimbursements. In purchase order, they have added a new feature called Dropship. And what Dropship allows you to do is it allows you to go into sales order, create an order for a customer, and for those items that have been coded as drop shippable, if that's a word, in other words, eligible to be drop shipped from a vendor, notice that there is now a button over here for Dropship. I'm going to pick the vendor that I want to perform that dropship, in this case IBM, And I can go in and I can fill in this sales order and include items that are going to be drop shipped, in fact, to multiple vendors that I'm sending purchase orders out to. And I can include sales order items that are going to be shipped directly from our site to the customer. So I can mix and match items for drop ship. I can mix and match vendors who are going to be on this sales order, as well as regular line items. And as soon as I go in and I save that in post, over on the purchase order side, oh, Jim needs the location. As soon as I post that, that will go over, and for each line item that's on the sales order, it will create a corresponding purchase order that we would then satisfy from the purchase order module. So we'll see those over here. Now, there are a couple rules. There's our drop ship from our sales order, and if you go in and you view that, you can see the information for the customer. So this is going to ship over to Sun Microsystems. A couple things to keep in mind is that the first thing you need to do in order to use Dropship is under the order entry, configure order entry, you need to turn on a checkbox. Let me scroll down here. You have a checkbox for turning on Dropship right here. And then we also indicate the sales transaction types that are going to be used for Dropship, and we map it over to the transaction document in the purchase order so that when I use this sales order transaction, it interfaces and allows it to create a dropship for this type of purchase order. So you can have multiple types of transaction definitions in here, but they will always be a one-to-one relationship between that type of sales order and that type of purchase order. For the items that you're going to use, you will have to also go in, and I'm going to leave this page, and you are going to have to change a little flag on the item record and indicate that the item can be drop shipped. Okay? Now, if you don't change that flag, then you'll find out when you go to create the item in the sales order that the drop ship flag is not turned on. Here's the flag kind of hidden down here in the details, but you can see that's there. And then lastly, you will also want to create price tables so that when those items go over to the purchase order, they do in fact have prices. If you don't create price tables, you'll find that you have to go back and populate in each of the vendor costs on the purchase orders, which could be rather tedious. So those are the features in Dropship. Anyone that's using sales order and has been waiting for Dropships is now readily available. It's very easy to use, and like all of these new features, if you go down in here and you drill down into the new feature list, they have put together some really great videos. They give an overview that describes what its capability is. Typically, they give a second video that will walk you through this step-by-step. And then the last thing they do is give a nice little demo of how it's actually done. Keep in mind, if you turn on these new features, you may also have to go back and give users permissions to be able to access some of the features. Don't forget the permissions. Okay. Let's take a look at our next new feature. For those people who are using inventory, they have also now required that you create or that you include a location code for each of your warehouses. And what we see happening behind the scenes here, I'm going to go ahead and bring up our warehouse listing, is that Intacct is developing their inventory module in the next year or so. You're going to see a lot of big changes in this product. And one of the things that they realized that they needed to do, doing this evolution of their product, they needed to include the location for each of the warehouses. So now you can see there's a red vertical stripe there. So I can't change this record. I couldn't add a new record without putting in a location. Now, why is that important? For those people who are operating in a multi-entity environment in Intacct, location is always related to entity. And if we transfer inventory, for instance, from one location, one warehouse to another, it may cross a boundary and go to another entity. Behind the scenes, Intacct will create that do-from transaction to support multi-entity processing. In this case, the movement of physical inventory, one warehouse to another, one business to another, and the do-tos and do-froms that go along with that. They have also enhanced the reporting for their serial number items. And what they have done is in the data dictionaries, they have now provided the field called serial number that will allow you to run reports and keep track of your information on serial number. So what I have done, I'm going in here and I've created a simple report. I just wanted to share this with you. It's under the inventory module. And it's called serial tracking. And what you want to do anytime that you want to use the object in the system for serialized tracking, there are 3 specific report groups in here that you'll want to take advantage of. The first is purchase document entry tracking detail. That's where that serial number is retained for transactions relating to purchase orders. On the sales side, it's referred to as sales document entry tracking detail. So when you go to make a new report, that's the starting point. That's the table you want to access. And then in the inventory module, for instance, if there was a movement of serialized items from one warehouse to the other that you want to track, the table would be called inventory document entry tracking detail. And you'll see that serial lot number field visible in each of these 3 tables that you can take advantage of. Okay, well, let's take a look at some of the other capabilities that they've added. And incidentally, I'll share this little look-see here. This is a Word document that I'm using for reference for this. Here's how that will display when you go to build the table. Purchase document entry detail. That's the table. Let's pull this out of the way for a second. Okay. Some additional things that they've done for those of you who are using recurring sales order transactions and bringing them in through the API or through a CSV template. Intacct has modified the product to allow you to actually record payment detail. This has been a limitation in the past. It's something that a lot of the users have been waiting for. So now if you talk to your engineers that help program the APIs into Intacct, please make them aware that that field is now available and they can in fact record the payment detail, particularly if you're interfacing with another payment system or business system. So they're now available in the recurring transactions. A couple new features that they've added here. For those of you who do recurring entries, they have gone in and they have modified what they refer to as the renewal macro. You'll find that under sales order entry down here in the far right corner. And for those of you that have this recurring process, typically you're used to a rather archaic wizard that you have to walk through in order to build a macro for the templates. Now what they have done is they've built a really nice user interface for that, and you'll see that it's nice and neat. It allows you to go in here and fill in each of the items in the screen and save it off, and you can have as many as you need. So they've replaced the wizard with a user interface that is a nice clean screen. Okay. A couple other things that they've done here. For those of you who are going to be required to meet the ASC 606 or the IFRS 15 for revenue recognition, Intacct has released in the last 6 months a product called Contracts. And Contracts is intended to satisfy those statutory requirements. Those companies that have to deal with revenue recognition and have subscription-based businesses The deadline, I believe, is 2018 for publicly traded companies, and 2019 for those that are privately owned but are subject to an audit or an accounting review. So this product is available. One of the features that they've added are a number of metrics that are available on performance cards for the contract module. You'll see this becoming a very big issue for anyone who's dealing with subscription-based business. For those of you who prepare financials, they have gone in and they have expanded the footer sections and the financial reports from 300 characters to 400. Your reports are getting cut off. This will give you a little bit more room to put those notes down in the financial statements. Not a big deal, but still useful. For users of Intacct's data delivery system, which is a bulk data extraction system that's available for Intacct on a subscription basis, they have also added in the roles object so that if you're shipping detailed data out of Intacct into a third-party system and using some business objects to control access to that, you can now export the roles that you've created in Intacct for security and load them into your external system and allow those to be used to control the permissions to the access of that bulk data in a third-party system. So the product is called Data Delivery Service. We see it in use for people who are using Intacct for front-end for accounting, but are then extracting large volumes of data, larger than you would use in the typical Intacct report, and sending them off to third parties for data mining. That role object is now available. Okay. One of the nicest features that Intacct has that I think every business should use is Intacct Collaborate. And the original design of Intacct Collaborate, which was from Salesforce Chatter, was to eliminate the back and forth that took place in organizations through email. If you haven't used Collaborate, I'd recommend that you turn it on today. Again, it is a free service from Intacct, and what it will allow you to do is communicate within your accounting organization, to store information, messages, files, against your transactions, your customer, your vendor records, and they have further enhanced this so that you can have the system email out of Collaborate to your users, so that they have now incorporated outbound email in Collaborate. Now, there are some settings that need to be changed to take advantage of this. First thing I'll do is, for those of you who are not using Collaborate, I'll show you how you get to use it. It's free. Go to your company, go down to subscriptions, and then down at the bottom here, you'll see Intacct Collaborate. You'll check that. You'll get a notification within an hour from Intacct it's been turned on, and then you can start taking advantage of Collaborate. Now, once you have it activated, if you'd like to take advantage of the email capabilities, under each of the user's preferences, which are located at the top right-hand corner of the screen here under My Name, you would go down to My Preferences. And if you scroll on down the bottom, here's one of those little banner notifications that tells you something new about it. In fact, it's about Collaborate, and there's a little demo for you. You can scroll on way down the bottom here, and this one doesn't have it. I have to use My Preferences. Here we go. Way down the bottom. And you can see here that you have checkboxes to pick up any post from your profile page, comments in which your posts or comments have been recorded against, any records that you're following, so that if, for instance, you're monitoring an issue with a vendor record or a customer may be past due, any mentions of you in a post. And down here, if I belong to groups, it would pick up on any posts that go to that. It will also email you. Well, why would we want to do this? It could be that you spend a fair amount of time away from the computer and you'd like to get these notifications to your smartphone, for instance. This is a great way to do it. So that's called email notifications. You first have to have Intacct Collaborate turned on. If you're using Salesforce, you would already be integrated. If you're not, please talk to us. And then for the user preferences, it's on a person-by-person basis. We go down towards the bottom of the user preferences and turn on the checkboxes where it's applicable. Okay. For those people who have user-defined dimensions, meaning dimensions that they've purchased from Intacct above and beyond the regular dimensions of department, location, employee, vendor, item, or customer, we now have the ability for you to be able to go back and reclassify transactions after they've been paid. Don't know if this applies to many users, but I'll share with you where it's at. If we go down and we look at the bills, and if, for instance, we find here Cisco's been paid, and I drill down into their record, maybe that was posted to the wrong dimension. All I need to do, and of course this is permission assigned. If you don't have permission to it, you can't do it, is I can go up here and I can click Reclassify, and now those other additional dimensions that you're using from Intacct will be available down here under the line area for you to reclassify paid transactions. This applies to both accounts payable and accounts receivable, and then you can go ahead and post that and save it. Okay. We have, for those people who are using multi-currency, they now are supporting more transaction types for the revaluation report. They now support funds transfers, other receipts, and deposits. It blocks any GL transactions for non-bank currencies. And now it includes a location filter so you can get some more accurate reporting from the general ledger. So for those of you who are using multi-currency, take a look at the capabilities here for the currency valuation. You'll find them down here under the release notes. One of the nice features in accounts receivable is they have now added the ability to include an aging report on your customers' invoices. So for any of you who would like to include that and also include it in statements, which I'll be talking about in just a minute, all you would need to do, I happen to have one open here, this is a sample invoice, is download your template from Intacct, have your Microsoft toolbar installed, and then you'll have these aging periods available. If you go to your add-ins and we go and we pull down our pull-down list, we can insert merge fields, and you'll find here under accounts receivable and your transaction type, in this case AR invoice, that the aging buckets are now available as a field that you can insert. So what I have done here is I've inserted them down the bottom. Then I'd probably dress them up a little bit with some boxes and some separators. If we save that and bring it back up, now when you produce invoices for your customer, you can also show them an aging. Speaking of accounts receivable, finally, Intacct is making available a statement format that you can go in and you can customize. Previously, there were 2 hard-coded statements in the system, both of them pretty plain vanilla. And now you can download that just like I did with the accounts receivable document. And if you would like to see things like the customer purchase order, a reference number, most of those items that you see in the header of the accounts receivable, you can add them to your statement and upload them and use and add a company logo if you like, add some colors. You can add that to that statement that you've customized and use that for your company. We've been waiting a long time. In fact, 2,600 people voted for that enhancement, so it's finally been delivered. Coming to a close here, a couple other things I'll share with you are that they have upgraded the security, and now the default reset duration for password no longer allows never. It is going to require the passwords be updated at least once a year. So you'll find that under the company configuration. And also, there's been some updates to the console templates, which applies in particular to dealers and also to the independent accountants who are involved in the Intacct product. So that is a roll-up of all of our features. As I indicated previously, you can find each of them under the Home button, then look under your 2016, and then here you'll find each one, which is also supported by a video, typically that shows you how to do the setup, as well as a demonstration of the product's capabilities. So at this point, I'd like to, if Philip is available, open the session up for any questions that any customers might have. Philip? He's just getting back from vacation. I think he's still catching up on things.
I'm sorry, guys. It's not letting me unmute lines, and it wasn't letting me unmute mine there for a minute either. More technical difficulties today. So if you have any questions on anything, please feel free to shoot us an email, support@masseyconsulting.net, as well as info@masseyconsulting.net. Either one of those will work. And I apologize again for the technical difficulties. I'm not quite sure what's happening, but we seem to be having some issues with the webinar system today, so I do apologize. But Jim, it looked like a great presentation, a lot of exciting features in this release 3, and I thank you for your time and for going over things in such wonderful detail.
Okay, sure thing.
It really looked like a great release. All right.
There's been a lot of content in this release, Philip, a great deal of content. So it's this is one of the bigger releases I've seen from Intacct this year.
Yeah, that's good. That's good, and it's quarterly releases, and it comes with your subscription. So again, driving results for companies and making things easier, giving you more automation. So that's great. Thanks everyone for your time today, and we will again post this on YouTube for everyone to take a look at and send out a link to it with our next scheduled Intacct email. So thank you very much.
Okay, bye now.